Okay, today we're going to look at capitalism, the negative features, the negative results that are built into the system. And we're going to look at how certain things break capitalism and create something entirely different. In the previous lessons, we noted the benefits and power of capitalism as an economic system. Seemingly a unique economic system that creates advancements and fulfills people's wants, demands, and needs. In this lesson, we look at how capitalism can hurt people in the short term and how big business can break the system. And in future lessons, we will go into what regulations might be needed to effectively run a capitalist system while preserving enough of the good while preventing enough of the negatives. A note: capitalism does not respond to short-term human suffering. Whereas the capitalist system might reach an equilibrium and fix, quote unquote, all of its own problems, it does that at the expense of human sufferings. Sometimes the fixes of capitalism is something we don't want to experience in reality. And whereas capitalism as a system runs from generation to generation to generation, we as humans only have one life, and if we do have more than one life, we are certainly concerned, shall we say, in the present life, and oftentimes the quote-unquote fixes of capitalism do not happen by itself. The invisible hand doesn't fix things within a lifetime, and so we see short-term suffering from the natural running of capitalism. And capitalism is a system, and it is sort of a game. And like any games in any systems, it can be hacked and it can be broken. There are certain eventualities, certain things that literally can be done that break the system wide open and destroy the system as we know it, and so then capitalism dies and it's into a brand new system. And thus, in order to make capitalism as we know it run, rules, regulations, and regulators are necessary. The two vocabulary words needed for today are Adam Smith, credited as the founder, the philosopher credited with the founding and creating of the theory of modern capitalism, even though capitalism's been around since the beginning of cities, modern capitalism, in his book on the Wealth of Nations. And his version of capitalism, or the version that was created based on his works, was called laissez-faire capitalism, where it is a modern form of capitalism never seen in history until the modern era that strives for minimal to no government involvement from the government, no government involvement, and it strives for the freedom of big business with machines, the Industrial Revolution capitalism. So let's go into what historical capitalism is before we talk about modern capitalism. Now, capitalism is as close to the natural original city economy as you can get. And that is seen in its simplicity. If you put 1,000 people together and give them resources, they will do something basically that is capitalism. It seems incredibly natural for humans to trade what they have for what they need. And we can even see this behavior in some primate species. Now remember, that is literally what capitalism is, and that's why we could say capitalism is close to natural, because it occurs in nature. Now this does not mean, I do forget what this is called, it could be called a nature fallacy, a natural fallacy, I forget, but just because something is natural and happens in nature for humans, or just because something is biological, doesn't necessarily mean it is desired in society that we live in today. But if something is natural, it does point and it does lead us in the questions of, are there advantages to it? So we see that the first cities and the first civilizations, once we have thousands of people together and they are not acting as families or friends, we have thousands of people who have to interact and provide for their own necessities and comfort, we get historical capitalism. Mostly it's individuals. There were not necessarily lots of big businesses in the ancient cities. It was a mostly free market, people free to buy and sell, very few big businesses. Yet there was, from the beginning, government regulation and a legal system to enact. So what we basically had was the game of capitalism set up with rules and a legal system to enforce those rules. From the very beginning, people and government realized you have to put limits on free market capitalism, the very first ones. Government was involved when needed, and government was involved to stop the negatives of capitalism. Oftentimes in the ancient world, government was involved in food production or the city building or setting limits on what could and could not happen in the trade market. And we see this clearly with one of the first civilizations of human history, the Babylonian Empire, the first written law code, Hammurabi's Code. A good number of the 200 and some odd laws, a good percentage, actually dealt with the economy. Government setting up rules, so much for so is they actually set up some prices for certain aspects of the economy. Not all of it, but certain ones. We see that like a third of the laws were focused directly on regulating the economy, but we assume that all the rest of the economy was the free market capitalist system. So government-regulated capitalism in multiple forms runs for thousands of years until we hit the Industrial Revolution, where there is an incredibly rapid increase in businesses and production in England. And what we get is an examining of literally the capitalist system. And many philosophers were examining many different things in the 1700s to try to come up with grand unifying theories of how things should be. Well, we get a philosopher, Adam Smith, and in 1776, he writes a book shortened to On the Wealth of Nations, which examines capitalism, and it becomes the basis for this new theory of laissez-faire capitalism. The theory goes basically that capitalism is efficient, it has all the factors we learned about in previous lessons, and in order to maximize the efficiency, there should not be government involvement or rules. Any government involvement or any rules inherently detracts from the efficiency and makes capitalism run less smoothly or less efficiently. And thus, if you are looking for the maximum wealth of nations, the maximum increase in business, the maximum increase of advancement, technology, and profits, you would want your businesses to run with the least amount of restriction, and inherently every government involvement in capitalism is a restriction. To put it simply, if capitalism is desired and good, do 100% capitalism. The term laissez-faire, leave it alone, hands off, let it be, let capitalism work. Now, to be fair, I have heard from some very reliable PhD sources that Adam Smith was more of a philosopher, and really the ideas credited to him of laissez-faire capitalism were not 100% exactly on what he was really thinking of at the time, but that comes from a pretty reputable PhD doctorate of Adam Smith. I have no reason to disbelieve, but I am not even remotely qualified to speak on that. Suffice it to say, what 100% is true, Adam Smith is credited with the ideas of laissez-faire capitalism. And it works. Laissez-faire capitalism with no government involvement maximizes growth, maximizes efficiency, but it has some very serious effects that people and citizens and governments do not like. The problem? There are too many negative outcomes. Just for an example, pollution, working, and living conditions. And those are some biggies. There is a warning, and you've heard it before. This is the problem with laissez-faire capitalism. Too much of a good thing is often bad. Something can be very good, and something can be the best choice. Capitalism could be the best choice you can choose, but too much of it might be a bad thing. Many things in life are like that. And economic systems are absolutely like that. More and 100% is not always or even often better. So I'd like to get into the main points that we are wary of, have to watch out for with unregulated capitalism. When capitalism and businesses are allowed to run as a system in the complexity of the modern age, these outcomes will inevitably happen. We know this because we have gone through it. We see all of these during the Industrial Revolution in both England, then Europe, Japan, and the United States. We have recognized it, we have seen it, we have debated it, and it does not fix itself fast enough for people to be happy, and we have seen that government intervention and regulations have roughly fixed the problem. Now, there may be other solutions on how to fix these problems other than government involvement in rules and laws, but what we know does not work is letting capitalism try to fix it itself. Now, some may argue that we are in a different mental state today than back in the day, and so maybe these problems wouldn't come back because we are different collective mental humans, and maybe the business owners of today would voluntarily not let these problems happen again. I tend to not think that's true, although there might be something to that. A collective maturing or a collective changing of the whole human psyche, and so we would just never let it happen again, like child labor? I don't know. I don't know if I'm willing to take that chance by getting rid of some of these laws. We do know what in the past has fixed these problems, and so I am wary of going back to when we didn't have the laws against these problems. Now, most of these come from the idea that capitalism is not run by anybody. It is a system of everybody making transactions and buying and selling. There is no universal design. The invisible hand does not exist. Capitalism as a system eventually tends towards one thing. It tends to find, through competition, the most efficient use of resources. It doesn't care. It doesn't think. Capitalism is not human. It's not a program, even. All it does is allow humans to compete, and out of that competition comes the most efficient use of resources to make a product. So remember, that's why some really horrible things will happen in capitalism. Probably the worst thing that happens without law, without regulations, comes from the fact that humans are just another resource. Humans are just another thing, just like iron, just like oil. Human labor is just another resource in the system of capitalism. Okay? So whenever you have a situation where there are more humans than jobs, it devalues the human labor. And we have seen that when there are more humans than jobs, capitalism will work humans literally to death. Because capitalism is trying to find the most efficient use of resources. And quite frankly, the most efficient use of human resources is to work them as hard as humanly possible, as young as humanly possible, and humans will resupply themselves through natural families and babies and just keep working them for their labor. That is the most efficient use. And when one breaks, you get another. There's no such thing in capitalism as retirement. There's no such thing as in capitalism as a useful human if they can't work. It removes humanity. And so we see when capitalism is left to run, businesses will hire child labor because children are cheaper, because children do more without pushing back like adults might. And the businesses that hire children will make a cheaper product and they will succeed in the marketplace. It's a fulfilling prophecy, a feedback cycle. We also see job security costs money. Why pay money for job security when you can just hire someone else if one of your workers gets broken? Same with unsafe working conditions. If there's an unlimited supply of workers, which there totally was in the Industrial Revolution, and don't kid yourself, there totally is today an unlimited supply of workers, unless government gets involved, because there's men, there's women, there's children, and there's people from other countries. Unlimited supply of workers unless government makes a law. It costs money for safety features in the workplace. If a worker gets injured, replace them. That is cheaper than making safety features. So no safety features get made. Below poverty wages. Would someone work for not enough money to survive? Yes, because they can almost survive. And when they work out their children, then the family can survive. So you will see when there's an unlimited supply of workers, the wages will be driven down to below poverty wages. Workers will compete to do the job for less. And that makes cheaper products. So capitalism likes it because remember, capitalism don't care about humans. Humans will then work 6 days a week. The only reason why they worked 6 days instead of 7 was number one, religious reasons of wanting one religious day off. And number two, humans who work 7 days die way too quickly, even for capitalism. You can't work 7 days a week and survive. So the typical work week without government laws is 6 days, right around 16 hours a day. And of course, unsafe living conditions, because those who own the apartments and those who build the apartments are still capitalistic businesses. So all the unsafe reasons and incentives that you would have in a factory, one would have in making housing. And so the housing for without laws is entirely unsafe and entirely deplorable living conditions. This is not a bug. This is a feature of the system. Humans who are treated horribly in the capitalist system produce cheaper goods. It always happens as long as there's more workers than jobs, which needs, the way we fix this, laws. Minimal treatment for workers and living conditions. Okay, a big thing all societies have always cared about is poverty. Poverty leads to human suffering. Poverty leads to instability and crime. It is something that's been around for since cities and humans care about it. Now, capitalism solves poverty. It literally does. And at the same time, capitalism doesn't care about poverty. So, for the poverty capitalism can't solve, the people starve and die. Now, as long as there is enough consumers and workers, the system does not care. You see, there's nothing built into capitalism that incentivizes helping those who are dying of poverty. Now, not many people would die in poverty if capitalism was left to itself. Let me tell you how capitalism solves poverty, okay? Capitalism is about the efficient use of resources. Think about it. There are only a certain amount of people hungry in a certain village or city. Let's say cities, okay? And there is entirely enough food in those cities. And this is a literal thing that capitalism does. I have the receipts. Tell you about it in a second where it used to happen. More food is thrown out from restaurants and households than is needed by the people who are hungry. Literally, the scraps on chicken bones is enough to feed everyone in the city who is dying of hunger, who is in food poverty. So what capitalism says is that if people are throwing out that much food in the garbage, there should be a business where someone collects that food, prepares that food, and sells that food to the people in poverty for just enough money to survive. This solves the hunger problem. It is also entirely unacceptable in a modern, developed country's society. It happened years ago, like 5 or 6 years ago, and I don't know where it is right now, in the Philippines. It's called pagpag, garbage chicken. There's a whole black market industry of where people collect the food scraps from the garbage and resell it to those who are dying of hunger. Now, where would those dying of hunger, they don't necessarily have jobs, where would they get the money? There's a whole nother industry of sort of recycling where someone could get just enough money to survive, and that would be picking through a landfill. In many underdeveloped or developing nations, you see many poor slums, favelas in Brazil, located near the landfills because it is allowed in those countries for a class of people to pick through the landfills to get just enough money to buy the food that's left on the bones from the chicken that were in the garbage, and those people survive. Capitalism finds a way to use every single bit of resources to keep people alive, but it is not acceptable in modern developed society. So what you get is two things. One, the government saying, okay, there is going to be abject starvation poverty because we're not going to allow people to pick through the trash and sell it. And we see the need for then government to fix what capitalism isn't allowed to solve. Capitalism has the answer to the starvation of poverty, but it is not an acceptable human answer. We don't want to live in a country where children have to eat garbage chicken. So we have to find another way that is not capitalism to feed the lowest class of abject poverty, the dispossessed in the class system. Another thing that capitalism does not take into account, unless it's very immediate, is the effect on the environment. Okay. Remember, the driving force of all of these transactions in competition is to find a cheaper, more efficient way to produce a product. Now, not taking care of the environment, using resources, using it all up, polluting the environment, extincting animals if they get in your way. All of that is more efficient and cheaper to produce a product in the now. The thing about environmental destruction is we don't feel the cost until later. So you can go years before you feel the negative effects of, let's say, destroying the forest or growing the desert or polluting a river. You can pollute the river and kill all the fish and harm the humans with toxic chemicals long before it actually costs the business more to make the product. And so all that irreversible damage and harm is done while lowering the cost of the product. So it wins for capitalism, but the things we care about, species, resource use, pollution, human health because of the pollution, that doesn't impact the cost of the product. So all of that is just hurting people, but capitalism keeps going and it won't stop because the product is cheaper. This is a fault of the system that it cannot address in the short run. In the long run, it'll all work itself out, but by that time we have poisoned, killed, and extincted multiple environments, biomes, and species, and let's just hope we don't extinct our own before it all balances out. Thus, thinking humans can come up with, hey, wait, we see what's happening with the environment. We don't want it to happen. Let's put a limit on capitalism, and we call it environmental protection rules. Sometimes the most efficient way to do something is efficient because it causes problems over there. And you don't want problems over there being caused, so you got to give up a little bit of the efficiency. Okay. Capitalism is great at providing some things for some people. Let's say a lot of things for most people. Yes, I'll go that far. Capitalism is great at providing a lot of things for most people, but by design, it does not provide something for everybody. Every capitalistic product or service has a limitation of those who can pay for it. So there is nothing produced in society that capitalism says everybody can have. There is always a slight bit of people who cannot afford or choose not to have it because they're spending their money on something else. So there is no such thing as a universal good or a universal service that everyone gets in a capitalistic society. But we as a society, as people, have decided that there are certain things we want everybody to have. Okay? For example, K through 12 education in the United States. It has been decided that we want every child, no matter what period, to have a K through 12 education. Well, capitalism in private schools can't do that. Healthcare, and we want it fairly equal. Capitalism can provide something for everybody if it's totally unequal, and then you can get the extremes. We in society are going towards the idea that every single person should have fairly equal healthcare. Well, capitalism can't do that. Capitalism can give healthcare to almost everybody, and it could give healthcare to everybody except the poorest people would have the worst healthcare, and society says no. Retirement. We have decided as a country we want everyone to have money in retirement. Well, capitalism doesn't do that. It could do it for most people, but not everybody. Clean water. We want everyone to have clean water. Parks. There are certain things we want every single human in society to have fairly equally, and capitalism doesn't do that. Capitalism provides, once again, a lot of something for a lot of people, but not that small percentage, which would go without. And so, this is where government would come in. If you want everyone to have K through 12 education, you are going to need the government to provide at least some of that, where either all of it or where capitalism fails. You could have private schools and the government step in for those who can't afford private schools, or you could just have government take over all the education. Healthcare, the same thing. You could have capitalism do healthcare and the government provide those who cannot work in the capitalistic system and get healthcare, or you could have government take over all of healthcare. Same thing with clean water. And certain things are certain things. The government takes care of clean water. The government takes care of certain parks. Sometimes it's half and half. Sometimes you have a park you pay for. Sometimes it's free. Colleges. You have private colleges that can raise their prices up to the sky. And then you have government colleges for people who can't afford certain private colleges. Healthcare used to be the same thing. You get your own private healthcare insurance, and then you have Medicaid for people who can't afford that. And things in healthcare are very, very much up in the air right now. So that is a limitation of capitalism. Getting one thing to everybody, capitalism cannot do. Okay, let's get into something that's very modern. I mean, we are talking Industrial Revolution on, last 150 years or so, up to 200. Big business. Capitalism is not necessarily set up for big business. Big business can break this game wide open. And if left to their own, big business will break it in a way that it is entirely not capitalism. We do not have a name for it. I could come up with a name, but it basically is all those science fiction movies where the corporations rule the world. That's what can happen within a few years, because big businesses break corporations. And the only reason our world isn't run by big business right now is because of the governmental laws keeping them in check. Guaranteed, period. Big business can break capitalism like that. The number one way is, of course, monopolies. If there is no competition, competition is the core of capitalism. When there is no competition, you don't have capitalism. So a business can get so powerful, it can get rid of the competition, and then it is the only business that sells internet, or the only business that sells cars, or the only business that sells Facebook. Okay? It's called a monopoly. They can buy up competition. They can intimidate competition. They can drop their prices and predatory price so the competition can't compete against them. They buy in bulk so they're automatically cheaper. Big businesses could, if they want, get rid of all the competition. And that's why it's illegal. Because once they do, they've broken capitalism. Big businesses create a huge worker versus business imbalance of power. Remember I said capitalism was people freely exchanging and negotiating money for their labor? Well, when the business is so big and powerful with so much money, it's not a free choice for those workers. In an ideal world, if the workers stopped working, the businesses would go out of business. But big business has so much money that they can live longer than the workers. So a lot of times on these strikes, big businesses can live longer than the workers can live. And so it's a very unequal thing. And in a lot of times, there's not even unions. Individual workers versus the power of a whole business, it's not even close. So there's an entire unequal power coming to the negotiations. And so the worker can't negotiate almost at all because the big business has so much power. Big businesses can break capitalism because they can lie about their products. It's very tough to be a home business, a business of only a family, produce a bad product, lie about it, and not have your reputation destroyed in the community and be run out of business. Big businesses service so many people, millions of people, that if their product if they lie about it, they're able to just keep going with it or just switch to another product. The downturn of big businesses lying about their products, it doesn't really hurt them that much. They could lie about the safety. They could lie about its use. And that again breaks capitalism because it's not an informed transaction. It's someone being able to repeatedly lie about their product and get away with it. And possibly the biggest way that business can break capitalism is they are literally so much more powerful than any group of workers or single workers that the businesses have a bigger voice in government, and government makes the rules everyone plays by. So even if you have government-regulated capitalism like we do in the United States, even if the government is making rules to keep capitalism going, the businesses can actually influence those rules, whereas the workers and the people cannot. And so you have the person who is the players of the game able to make the rules and, I don't want to say bribe the officials, but make the rules and influence the officials, and that thus they break the game. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is to know where capitalism can go wrong, to know where it has gone wrong in the past, and to keep it from going back to where it went wrong in the past. Look, it's a process. It's a system. You can tweak systems. Humans have been doing that forever. Engineers know how to do this. Mechanics on a car know how to keep a car going for 200 miles. You've got a running system, tweak it. Just be careful you don't change it too fast. And just be careful you measure the impact of what you change. There are plenty of things, and I could list them off, what we've done to capitalism in the last 100 years that haven't had the intended results, have actually made things worse, but we are too scared or not intellectual enough to actually examine what we did, see how it's wrong, and stop it. You got to be serious about this. If you make a tweak to capitalism, you've got to measure whether it actually worked. And if it didn't, you have to have the guts to go back and say, we were wrong, and try something else. But you got something good to start with. We'll talk about that in a second. The solution is start with capitalism, put a lot of government rules and regulations in, and have a really strong legal system that can enforce these rules and regulations to make sure the bad things you don't want to happen don't happen. It's called a mixed economy. Government regulated capitalism. It's a mixed economy. Yes, you are going to give up some efficiency and you are going to give up some advancement. I'm sorry. But it will be your attempt to fix the problems that come from unregulated capitalism. Which problems? Just look to the Industrial Revolution. Just look to the pollution. Just look to the things that have already happened wrong and we're like, wow, we don't want to live like that. So if you like where the world is right now, then don't change anything. The world right now is a mostly government-regulated capitalistic system that is running year to year, producing unheard of advances and lifting in the last 10 to 20 years, lifting more people out of poverty than the world has ever seen. The system is literally running fairly well. Will it crash? I don't know. But for the past 200, 250 years, it has been the fastest, largest growth in human standard of living in all of history. So if you like what's going on right now, I feel that you are fairly safe in saying, let's keep it the same. You have a good argument. If you want to change capitalism for various reasons, let's go into a couple questions. Why not scrap the whole thing and create something new? Personal opinion. I don't think you can. I think because an economy is so complex, any possible attempt at a finite number of humans without artificial intelligence computers trying to create something that would work even a fourth as good as the present system is unlikely at best and a billions of lives lost disaster in the making. The stakes are so high and the task is so complex, I do not believe, in my estimation, any group of people are up for that task of redesigning a whole new economic system and making it work. Well, if we started from pure capitalism and then added government regulations and it seemed to work, well, why don't we start from just total government control, communism, and then add some freedoms, kind of like what the Chinese had done. And yes, I get it. The Chinese have created a fairly workable system that is competing in the market and seems to actually work, going from a total communist control of the economy and letting freedoms come in. Well, I personally believe this. I would rather start from a position of freedom, of total individual freedom, and then make some rules to limit that freedom in order to make the economy run. I value freedom above all else and only impact the freedom when we have to prevent harm. So if we're going to reach the same place, government-involved mixed economy, I would like to start from freedom and find the answer instead of starting from government control and no human rights and find the answer. And if you want to go even further, how are you going to get to total government communist control? The only way to actually get to a communist government and then open it up is through a revolution where millions of humans die. There has not been. You cannot vote in communism. In order to actually get to communism, you will have a revolution where millions die. It has to happen. No one becomes communist with the government having total control without a bloody revolution. And then once they're in power, no one stays communist without oppression. So I would like to avoid that. I would like to start where we all are, capitalistic freedoms, and then if we have to get more government involvement and limit the capitalistic freedom, I can be persuaded to go there. And finally, why, if you're asking me, why would I keep capitalism and then make the changes? Simple answer. In the past 250 years, more people have experienced more literacy, more education, more increased lifespan, more increased standard of living. More people have been risen out of poverty than any other time in history, and from all signs point to it was the capitalist system of the world that ushered in all these changes. So why would I like to keep capitalism? I would like to keep that going. And I am very open to making tweaks and changes as we determine exactly what we want with it. And that, in one lesson, is the major ideas to watch out for when you're running a capitalist system. What are the negative things that you have to account for because capitalism will not fix on its own, or at least it won't fix it in a way you like? And what can break the system? And so it's not capitalism anymore. The things to watch out for, the things that can break it. All right. Thanks for watching.